Hello, my name is Jillian Lee Meyer. I am a dual PhD student in social psychology and cognitive science, studying moral psychology at Indiana University, Bloomington. Today, I have a quick presentation for you on the dual process theory when it comes to moral psychology. So you might have heard of Kahneman and Tversky's research on dual process, system one, or conscious reasoning, system two, or emotional intuitive reasoning. This is that applied to moral psychology. So you have that intuition, that quick thinking, and reasoning is your more conscious decision making. So we're going to talk about tying those basic psychology theories with dual process into moral psychology more specifically. So getting started, you've probably heard of Freud. You either love him or you hate him. He was a neurologist from Austria. You can see he did psychoanalysis work. He's very well known for that, which is basically talking about your conscious and your unconscious mind, and how your unconscious mind might actually be influencing your behaviors, not necessarily just your conscious mind. If you've heard of id and ego, you also might know that he tied a lot of things back to parents and talked about sexual theories of development throughout the lifespan. These are things you might have heard about Freud, but if you know the classic image of like someone sitting in a therapist chair and someone giving therapy, that is kind of the image that people use when they talk about Freud. Again, either love him or you hate him, but he's got some interesting things here for us to think about. I will move this down. There we go. So he had this image to represent our conscious mind versus our unconscious mind. Again, this was a theory by Freud, this iceberg to give a visual. So that conscious mind is what you see up on top. That's your rational thoughts, your perceptions. This is the dual process model of rational conscious thinking, system one instead of system two. Then you've got the unconscious mind, and these are more emotional. These are instincts. These are fears. I feel this certain type of way all of a sudden, and I don't know how exactly to explain it. And what can actually make up this unconscious mind? Maybe there's some kind of family trauma. You have some kind of mental health trauma from when you were young. So something triggers those automatic fears when you're in a similar situation or something like that. That's not actually rational. You're not thinking, I'm feeling scared here and this is why. You just have that automatic feeling. Another place you could come from are evolutionary triggers. So are there triggers that our ancestors became sensitive to that play into our automatic fears and instincts just based on our natural biology? So again, you've got this difference between the conscious mind. This is what you can see. This is what you can think about. It makes sense. And then your unconscious mind, those are those more intuitive, automatic reactions that happen quicker and without explanation. Sometimes they line up, I will say. The dual process works together. Sometimes you'll find it goes in opposite directions. Now I'm introducing another psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. You might have heard of him. He's a social and moral psychologist, also has done a lot of work in evolutionary psychology. And so remember in the last slide, I was saying that evolutionary triggers can possibly be what stimulates that unconscious mind, that bottom of the iceberg under the water. So what he came up with was something called moral foundations theory. Now, what that is it is a set of 5 or 6 different moral values, such as care, authority, loyalty, sanctity, equity, equality, or fairness. And these are triggers that could play into these automatic instincts we have on maybe moral or ethical decisions, such as you have an intuitive sense of, I want to be loyal to my team. Like I'm a big Steelers fan, so it doesn't matter who you are. If you come in with a Ravens jersey, I have that automatic reaction of, ew, Ravens, don't like it. But it's not something I'm consciously thinking of. Maybe it's something that aligns with my conscious mind after, but it's more, I feel this strong sense of loyalty to my team that anybody that says something bad about it, automatically bad. It's just that feeling I have that's in my unconscious mind. So maybe there are other triggers like that where you react in a way that doesn't make sense. And maybe these are based, like I said, on earlier traumas. Maybe they're based on our evolution. We have this biological foundation of what has worked for our ancestors in the past in terms of making moral decisions, what has kept our ancestors alive, being fair, being loyal, respecting authority, values such as that. So I want to talk about here. We talked about Freud and his iceberg model. I want to talk about what Jonathan Haidt did to this model. It's called the social intuitionist theory or model. So again, we have our conscious mind, we have our unconscious mind, same thing we talked about with Freud. But now on top of it, John Haidt proposes this as the image of dual process theory, this difference between moral intuitions, emotional reactions, and moral reasoning, or the conscious rationales that we have in our decision making. And what I want to point out here is that you can see that the rider is very small and the elephant is very big. That's significant because John Haidt's argument is that our intuitive mind, that unconscious, really has more control than we think when it comes to our decision making. And so if you're the rider, you're the conscious mind, you're in control on top. If your unconscious mind says, no, I'm in fight or flight, this feels intuitively wrong to me, that elephant is going to have no problems pulling the conscious mind in a different direction. If the conscious mind wants something, maybe it can steer that elephant, maybe its emotional reaction lines up. But at the end of the day, if your unconscious is feeling a certain way, if you're feeling intuitively morally violated, you're going to be taken to another decision. So this is showing the difference in how we make ethical decisions when it comes to either our system one, conscious, rational, I think of like a pros con list, thinking about a moral decision versus our unconscious mind, those triggers, those instincts and intuitive feelings that come up when we're in a moral situation. And John Haidt's social intuitionist theory says that unconscious mind is going to take the reins. So if it feels a certain way, you're probably going to act in that way. And then after that, you're just going to come up with reasons of why you acted that way so that you seem logical. It doesn't seem like it was your unconscious mind. It seems like it was a conscious choice of yours, when really that elephant is what's in control this whole time. So elephant and the rider. Okay, this is my slide now. See, I had the picture of Freud and John Haidt, and you've got me. So social and moral psychologist, cognitive scientist, studying moral decision making. I ran an experiment last year, and let me explain it to you. So what I was wondering here was, is John Haidt right? Is it true that our unconscious mind really plays a dominant role when it comes to our moral decision making? Or should we say, human on a horse, and it's more equal than is depicted in his model? So what I wanted to do there was separate the two processes, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, when it comes to making moral decisions. Now, this seemed really easy when it came to the conscious mind, because that's usually how we handle moral decisions. Again, that unconscious mind might be taking us in a different direction, but when we think about a moral dilemma, we're using that rational conscious mind. So asking people moral dilemmas, what would they do in those situations? That seemed like the easy part. Now, how do we test the unconscious mind? How do we tap into what people are not thinking about in order to evaluate how they would make a moral decision? So what I focused on in this study is I focused on some trigger words when it comes to moral violations that applied to college students. So examples were cheating, stealing, disloyalty, dishonesty, and unfairness. Those were the 5. So I focused on those. And again, the self-report portion, this is what you can see in the bottom right. This one is about being honest or not. So you have a grandmother who has Alzheimer's. She forgets that she has told you a bunch of stories before, and she always asks you, oh, have I told you this story? If you're honest and you say, yeah, you've already told me that, Grandma, she gets very confused, disoriented, and just unhappy. But if you lie to her, if you're dishonest and you say, no, you've never told me that story before, then it makes her happy. And she loves telling the story, and she seems like she gets more of her memory back. And, you get the idea. So it's not totally clear what the correct answer would be here when it comes to dishonesty or honesty. A lot of assessments are very limited because of the social desirability bias, if you're familiar with that. Basically, if I ask you a bunch of questions like, Do you feel like you are a good person? You'd probably say yes. You know, do you feel like you consider all the different moral values when it comes to a moral dilemma that might conflict? You'll probably say yes, you know, and it's not as realistic as when you're actually considering a dilemma, where again, it's not obvious what the right answer would be. I think that's something that the field really needs to improve on, making sure that we're asking questions in a way that it is truly morally ambiguous. So again, no right or wrong answers. Then they indicate how much they disagree or agree with whatever the decision is. So I think they all took the antisocial, so like the dishonest, the unfair take when it came to the conscious mind. But then the unconscious mind, what we used was a dual process model that separated conscious responses from unconscious. Now, if you think about certain tests, such as like the Harvard test about the IAT, the attitudes one, where you're kind of pushing keys really fast. So you see a word or a face and you have to push whatever it is, F or J on the keyboard. That's the best way to describe it. If you haven't, look up the IAT, implicit attitude test that Harvard made. It is very, very cool. And also, you know, there's methodological problems with that as well, I will say, before I go promoting the IAT at you know, no matter what. But anyway, so it's this idea that you can isolate your implicit attitudes or ideas or feelings from your conscious ones by, you know, priming you really quickly, or not showing you a term really fast. You just kind of, you have it stored in your unconscious mind, but you're not totally conscious of, oh, I'm rationalizing this word is dishonesty, so it's going to go in this category. If you look to the right, you can see they were pushing two keys, M or Z, and they were categorizing words as either neutral or morally wrong. Now, those neutral words were things like baking and painting, words like that. Morally wrong, it was things like genocide and rape, you know, so things that were very clear in that category. Then we had our target words, which again was cheating, stealing, dishonesty, like the vignette we see for the moral reasoning task. So what we wanted to see was, if quickly primed with one of these moral value words, let's say dishonesty, will people correctly categorize the following word as neutral or morally wrong? Now, if someone has an intuitive unconscious sense that lying is always wrong, dishonesty is always wrong, you should always be honest. If we prime them with dishonesty, they're thinking dishonesty is wrong, dishonesty is bad. My unconscious mind is stimulated by this idea of this very bad, morally wrong value. We flash the word baking, which is a neutral word. Your unconscious mind is saying, bad, bad, bad. I just saw the word dishonesty. And you accidentally hit the M key to categorize it as morally wrong. So that's what we're looking for here. Basically, the mistakes that people make. Do they have some kind of intuitive bias, some kind of unconscious bias that every time they see dishonesty or disloyalty, whatever it is, they're making mistakes and seem to be in the mindset of morally wrong? That suggests that they have a bias for or against one of these words. So you would imagine somebody who thinks lying is always the wrong thing to do, you should always be honest, they have this unconscious bias that dishonesty is always wrong. You would think then in this vignette, in the moral reasoning task that's more conscious mind, they would say, I would be honest with my grandmother 100%. That's when it would line up, you see, the moral intuition with the moral reasoning. So they kind of team up and work together. But if we saw that the results of the moral intuition task, where let's say they're always biased by dishonesty, they always think dishonesty is wrong, but then they go to this moral reasoning task and they say, oh, I would lie to my grandmother because it makes her feel better. Then we have a tension. Then we have a tension between that unconscious and conscious mind, between moral intuition and moral reasoning. So then the question becomes, which is more powerful? Is it the moral intuition, as Haidt suggested, that elephant that is much bigger. So whatever we see happen in the moral intuition test, in that unconscious mind, is that going to be reflected in all of the moral reasoning questions? Yes, they align. It seems like the unconscious does play a big role. Or are they going to mismatch? Are they not going to line up? We're going to see tension between the two. We're going to see that what we see when it was primed in the unconscious task is not what's reflected in the moral reasoning. Therefore, maybe his social intuitionist model is wrong, and moral reasoning really plays more of a role, that conscious mind, and we can override those intuitions easier. Yes, good job. Thanks for hanging in with me. So, what did I find? Basically, not a lot. A few cool things. So again, what I put here, our moral categorization task, MCT, that was the subconscious task where they were pushing the keys. A high MCQ means high antisocial. So again, I mentioned that we use the antisocial framings of the moral decisions. Yes, I'd be dishonest. Yes, I'd be unfair. Yes, I would cheat here. So basically, it's not the less moral choices, but the less pro-social choices, or the less virtuous choices, you could also say. Some of the other measures I use, the Moral Foundations Questionnaire, back to John Haidt, that is a measure of moral intuition, as he says, a measure of shame and guilt. So we could see if they had any sense of, oh, I'm feeling guilty or shameful. Maybe I'm, saying that I'd be dishonest and cheat, and now I'm feeling these other kind of feelings. Psychopathy, which you would imagine would be negatively correlated with morality, but interesting to see if there's any kind of different personality types that would reason differently in ethical decisions. And then one more that was the self-importance of moral identity scale. Basically, how important is it for you to be a good person and to reflect the values of the converses of all of the antisocial values? So how important is honesty to you, and how important is fairness? How important is loyalty? All of those good things. You can see what we saw in some of our mediation analyses that we picked out as being interesting. So one of them was the MCT, which again means that task of the subconscious pushing the keys. We saw that those who had a bias when it came to the word unfairness, those did connect with their unfairness score in the moral reasoning questionnaire. But it was also mediated by their equality score in the Moral Foundations questionnaire. So that suggests that they do have an intuitive sense of unfairness, which did then lead to how they scored in the moral choice questionnaire, moral reasoning questionnaire. So this is a link. We didn't see a direct link between the automatic processes in the subconscious task. We didn't see a direct line from that to unfairness, only when it was mediated by that equality score in the Moral Foundations questionnaire, which is interesting because it suggests that equality is what is being measured by all three of these items in our questionnaires. The next one is that we found that the 5 moral principles are the ones I said: cheating, stealing, disloyalty, all of those, that those did correlate. Again, those are antisocial terms. So, cheating, stealing, those did correlate with values in the self-reported psychopathy scale. So again, we figured a negative correlation between good moral values and higher psychopathy. But when we flip the moral principles to being the antisocial, the dishonesty and disloyalty, we do see that they correlate with the self-reported psychopathy scale. But then that was also mediated by the personal feelings questionnaire, which was that shame and guilt questionnaire. And so it was correlated with the psychopathy scale, but only when people were feeling bad about how they answered in that moral reasoning questionnaire. So they answered everything in one way, the antisocial way. They were feeling some kind of way about it, guilty, and it led them to score higher on the psychopathy scale. So maybe that's some kind of feelings of selfishness related to that guilt or shame that then led to higher scores on the psychopathy scale, or maybe something else. And then one more, that self-importance of moral identity scale. How important are these traits to you that we've been measuring? It did positively correlate with the 5 moral principles, the cheating, disloyalty, dishonesty. What it is, the self-importance of these values, higher means good. The 5 moral principles, remember, are antisocial, so lower bad, you see. So they were only correlated when it was mediated by the self-reported psychopathy scale, meaning that when you had that combination of the psychopathy scale scoring higher on that with valuing being a good person, then it aligned with your results on the antisocial words in that moral reasoning test. So something about that brought that connection out, that these things might be important to you. But if you were feeling a type of way that day, that different traits that correlated with psychopathy, maybe that impacted how you responded in the moral reasoning questionnaire, which again suggests some kind of link between the subconscious mind and how you're feeling in the moment with how you are going about your moral decision making. Again, no direct correlations between that subconscious and conscious reasoning processes in this experiment. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these results don't mean anything. So moral decisions, fast or slow, the name of this presentation based off the Kahneman Tversky book. Fast, moral intuition; slow, moral reasoning. So how do we know? Both play a role. Who knows how much they play a role? The study was inconclusive, so it could have concluded that these processes are separate in our moral decision making, or more research might be needed in order to prove definitively one or the other. But I do think that there are a lot of measures right now that either focus on moral reasoning or moral intuition. And that was the idea that I had going into my research was, okay, let's isolate both and see which one really is more dominant when it comes to moral decision making. But I'm at the conclusion now that I think, you know what, dual process, 2 pieces to the process that still work together. It's hard to separate the two because they really do work together in all of our decision making. So I think it's okay to put those together, and we don't necessarily need to have a conclusion of which one is more powerful than the other. In practical moral decision making, they're both going to play a role, and that result is potentially what could be more interesting for your research efforts. So I put some future research ideas here as well. So explore this relative impact further, see if you have a different study design or interpretation of the results. You can expand on the research with priming, where we were talking about priming with those moral value words. There's some cool research out there. You can look up Daryl Cameron using process association, Bertram Goronsky. Those are good names if you're looking for more literature on this. And then finally, investigating philosophical frameworks in the brain areas. This dual process kind of gets a little more cognitive psychology, a little more neuroscience-y. So if that's something you're interested in, you know, put people in an MRI, look at brain regions and see, is it their ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is what illuminates when it comes to moral intuitions or that fast processing, or the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is involved in that conscious decision making. So you might go the neuroscience route and look at it there, see if you find any similarities or differences. But that is all I have for this research presentation. Thank you again. My name is Jillian Lee Meyer. Feel free to reach out on my website or email, and check us out on Instagram and TikTok at Jillian Lee Morality.